Central Ohio has been growing rapidly, and the Planning Commission has requested feedback on several upcoming road projects, including some road widening. I pushed back hard against the road widening, and I'll share all of the points of this email, but this really gets at the question, what can you do to make your city more sustainable? In this episode, I'll cover what's at stake, which turns out to be a lot, what to do, the sample letter again, and as a permaculture urbanist, I'll share how better transportation policy supports food security and helps restore the lost half of life on Earth. Welcome to Edenicity, best practices for sustainably abundant cities. Let's start with the high stakes. We've occupied half the land on Earth, and we've wiped out half the life on Earth. To heal the planet and avert crisis, we must scale back our land use. Because of the enormous scale of the food, transportation, energy, and housing systems that we depend on for our survival, and the fact that these systems occupy so much of the planet, sustainability is much more about large-scale systems than small-scale life choices. And of course, this feels super disempowering. I get it. I mean, I've been there. I grew up car-free. I've been vegan for decades. I co-founded an eco-village, volunteered with community gardens, and founded a market garden. I've built tiny off-grid houses and lived in one. I've hauled construction materials via cargo bike over hilly country roads. Yeah, it's a lot, and most people aren't going to make all of these choices. And even if they did, I ran the numbers, and it still wouldn't be enough to make that much of a dent in our land use. So what can we do to scale back our land use? Well, cities use less than 3% of the land and house more than half the world's population, and that number is growing by 200,000 people a day. The Edenicity plan is to sustainably produce energy and food within city limits, so that we can then repair the damaged ecosystems. But wait a minute, aren't cities already too crowded for all of that? Well, it turns out that car infrastructure, such as roads and parking spaces, already account for over 50% of some cities. And when you include the responses to cars, such as green strips and setbacks, cars and their infrastructure can take up to 80% of cities. In addition to that, detached housing occupies way more land than multifamily housing, such as apartments and townhouses. So to support Edenicity, the biggest thing you can do is to push for public transit and multifamily housing. So the plan today is to load you up with some really good arguments for that first item, public transit, so that you're ready when your planning organizations seek feedback. And by the way, if you're liking this episode, be sure to leave a like. And while you're at it, if you see that subscribe button, be sure to click that so you don't miss any future deep dives like this. All right, let's get back to that article. They quoted a Planning Commission member as saying that Central Ohio is growing rapidly, on pace to reach 3.15 million people by 2050. The official goes on to say, projects like these are essential for preparing and accommodating this growth within our mobility network. That seems logical, right? If the region's growing, more people are moving around, so we need bigger roads. Makes sense, right? Well, let's dig into the details. One of the areas that they wanted feedback on was U.S. Route 33 Southeast Corridor. This project will widen U.S. Route 33 from 4 lanes to 6 lanes between Interstate 270 and Diley Road in Fairfield County. That's basically the area that I've outlined in yellow. Here's my response. Do not widen the roads, especially on US 33, between Route 270 and Diley Road. Doing so is a short-sighted misuse of resources that comes at a high opportunity cost. The current lack of public transportation between Columbus, much of Canal Winchester, and Pickerington deepens already entrenched poverty and denies employers access to a broader pool of labor. Both of these effects reduce overall GDP and tax revenue. I'm hoping that this is relatively clear to the Planning Commission, but just to illustrate this point, Columbus is notorious for entrenched poverty. Columbus is a wonderful place to live if you own a car. It has some of the shortest commutes in the country, and the vast majority of people get around by car. 83% of commuters commute by themselves in a car, and only 2.3% of commuters get around by public transit. The problem is the number of people who don't have cars is much larger than that in Columbus, and if you don't own a car, Columbus is a miserable city to get around. For example, it's not uncommon to have medical or other needs that involve a trip from downtown Columbus to Pickerington or Canal Winchester. But as it stands right now, the bus service stops well short of Diley Road. So if you don't own a car by reason of poverty, you're Other options would be to walk, which would be the better part of a day, or to take an Uber, which can run you up to $50 round trip. I also looked into bicycling for an appointment that I had, and it was a treacherous set of connections that I would not wish on anybody. So I urged the Planning Commission to instead invest in high-quality public transit infrastructure, such as a bus rapid transit or BRT express from downtown Columbus, connecting with frequent local service in Canal Winchester and Pickerington. Now, what I drew here would not necessarily be an express route, but the point is that public transit out to these areas is sorely lacking. Now, I know in the US a lot of people are down on buses, which is tragic because in many parts of the world, buses are well-appointed public amenities that people of every income level use on a daily basis. One especially pernicious perception people have is that buses are somehow less safe. So think about this, bus versus car safety. Which one is safer and by how much? What's your number? Are cars 2 times safer than buses? Are buses 3 times safer than cars? How much of a difference are we talking about? For my letter, I looked up the answer in the National Safety Council fact sheet. It turns out that buses were, I wrote 20 times safer, but it turns out that that information was obsolete. Buses are 50 times safer than cars per passenger mile. So we're talking about deaths due to crashes per passenger mile. I wrote, the lives saved and injuries avoided through high-quality public transit produce immediate and lasting gains in GDP, hence higher tax revenues. I also forgot to add that buses are partially, or in many cases, totally self-funding, unlike the vast majority of roads. At this point, people usually voice some concern about the safety of riding buses versus driving in their cars. And I find this absolutely baffling, having spent over a decade riding buses nearly every day in a big city. I can recall only one time when a friend of mine, and I wasn't there at the time, had something stolen on a bus. But in my relatively few years of owning a car, I've had stuff stolen from cars on multiple occasions. I've had cars broken into. I've had a car stolen and completely wrecked. And sadly, I've had a relative by marriage killed in a carjacking. And I've never even heard of incidents of this sort on a bus. Also, at this point, I often hear from viewers asking for comments about self-driving cars. And honestly, the jury's very much out as to their ability to deliver a safer experience. But more to the point, self-driving cars will not solve the problem that buses are solving in this case, as you'll see in a moment. I wrote, even with ridership at a pitifully low 15% of capacity, 15% capacity is bad enough that gets headlines. An 80-passenger bus would carry 12 passengers who otherwise would require cars. Since a car carries an average of 1.5 through passengers, a bus would replace 8 cars, considerably reducing congestion. Now, with self-driving cars, a bus would replace more than 8 cars, because with self-driving, you're going to have empty cars traveling the roadways on their way to pick somebody up. But we're just looking at a worst-case scenario. At capacity, a bus would replace 54 cars. So yes, the passengers in every car in this picture could fit on that bus. I continue with, scalable transit development is crucial to any potentially high-growth region. Toward that end, public transit is far more flexible than road widening. Here's what I mean. Buses use 1/20th as much lane infrastructure per passenger as cars, so bus capacity can grow 20-fold without any road widening at all. Such increase also would dramatically improve frequency of service. Which schedule would you prefer? The schedule before growth, maybe 1 bus per hour, or after 20-fold growth, where transit services can now provide a bus every 3 minutes, or an articulated bus every 5 or 6 minutes. By contrast, doubling the number of lanes at best accommodates only a 2-fold increase in car traffic, beyond which service is considerably degraded due to congestion. Spending on more lanes rather than investing in public transit is a brittle growth strategy that depletes the public purse. So are you seeing the dynamics here? As you add cars to a road, the quality of the experience goes down, while as you add buses to a road, the quality of the experience goes up for a really long time before you need any new road infrastructure at all. The transit option opens the door to mixed-use development around express transit stops. Transit-oriented development has proven wildly popular to residents and remunerative to municipalities throughout the world. I'll post a link to Strong Towns and Urban 3, which have done a lot of work in this area, down in the pinned comment. Public transit's scalability, safety, social equity, decongestion effects, and ability to generate economic growth have substantial cost-saving and revenue-generating effects that far outweigh the case for road widening. In short, don't widen the roads. Invest in bus rapid transit, the far more future-proof option. Okay, here's a summary of the main points we covered today, and thanks as always to the channel's wonderful patrons who helped to make this possible. Take care, stay green, see you next time.